A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome once again to HJN Season 5. And I feel like the fueling is mutual, but it's also pretty much the same deal as what we have. We are, of course, having a lot of franchises worth talking about, and I've covered a good amount of them by now. Call of Duty, Ant Man, Cuphead, Rocky Balboa, Harry Potter, and even A Nightmare on Elm Street. But for today's piece, what I'm going to do is take a bit of an invincibility factor to this. And we'll basically have a whole franchise dedicated to the Invisible Man. Yeah, so basically speaking, what I can say about the Invisible Man are, well, a few things. It goes as far back as the 1930s, film-wise, with the 1933 installment starring Claude Rains. His iconic role as the Invisible Man, along with the unique special effects that they put together for the film, were one of a kind. They were something that not many people had known about, or practically anybody at all in the film industry knew how to perfect. And in this instance, it sure was well made for the time period. And even though the Invisible Man was actually killed off by the end of the first film, that still didn't really mean much for the studios. Universal decided to bring back the Invisible Man for another round with The Invisible Man Returns in 1940. And it was also another film called The Invisible Woman, essentially a bit of an adaptation of The Invisible Man, but with more of a gender swap. It's a bit of a unique parody, if you will, but is kind of more lighthearted in comparison. Then, of course, there are a few other films that would come around throughout the 1940s, including one that actually centers on espionage during World War II. Quite impressive when you think about it. They made a film not only during World War II, but it was an impressive, ingenious idea that they just had to try out. But then, of course, even though the second run of the Universal monster films throughout the 1940s would come to an end just after World War II ended, knowing that the real horrors of World War II were more than enough to overshadow the horrors that were displayed on the big screen, that didn't really mean that comedians Abbott and Costello wouldn't bring back the Invisible Man. And while he wouldn't entirely make as much of a physical appearance, he still did nonetheless. Famously, Vincent Price would be the man responsible for the role, just like what we saw in the 1940 film The Invisible Man Returns. So, this is by far considered to be second outing for Vincent Price. And while we haven't had much of Claude Rains or most of the other actors involved with the character, a lot of us can agree that throughout the 30s, 40s, and even 50s, The Invisible Man had a great run in the black and white era of filmmaking. And Abbott and Costello, with all of their monster meetups, especially with the others like Mummy, Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, and others, the Invisible Man sure was able to stand out in a unique way. And some people still do think that it is a near perfect way to have Abbott and Costello meet one of the famous iconic Universal monsters. That all-encompassing mash, of course, would continue to go on well into the 60s, 70s, 80s, especially with franchises like Munsters, Monster Squad, and there will, of course, be animated cartoons, including a meetup with Alvin and the Chipmunks. Yeah, some of Universal's classic monsters, apart from the Wolfman and Frankenstein monster, the Invisible Man would, of course, make a bit of an appearance in the series just as well, alongside many other things just as well. There was even the iconic role of the Addams Family, in which that they did bring together a number of different characters, mostly Universal monster-wise, not only as inspirations for the Addams Family, but also that they would have an Invisible Man-like character appear in the franchise as well. And we're not just talking about the original serial from the 60s, but the Addams Family in 1991, as well as the 2019 film. You could say the Addams Family had their share of Invisible Man well within it. But then, of course, there came along another remake. The following year, in 2020, there was Elizabeth Moss's The Invisible Man. And this film was unbelievable in comparison. This one actually made it much more spooky than it really should have. Instead of it being some sort of scientific phenomenon, The film does encompass an invisible man based on the aura of technology. Seriously. A light bending surface on some sort of suit is made so that it creates the feeling of invincibility. And when this invisibility is used against Elizabeth Moss, she ends up getting taken away. Framed for murder, cold-blooded murder, right off the bat. And as insane as that whole idea sounds, you really ought to know that by the end of the film, she herself would don the Invisible Man costume and take out her own enemies that apparently had a grudge with her. It was a pretty wicked film, I will say. And it's even scarier when you realize that the idea of technology creating invisibility to someone might actually come around, rather than it being some sort of mad scientist phenomenon that apparently Claude Rains had used throughout most of the original film from 1933. And I guess you could say that an 87-year difference really shows just how much film has evolved, as well as plot elements. Still, there's a lot more I could say about The Invisible Man, like how Claude Rains and many other actors involved, even Vincent Price. He's had a lot of growth throughout the 50s and 60s, especially since his involvement in The Invisible Man Returns, as well as his little voiceover at the end of Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man. But I feel like that I've covered a good amount of it already. The whole franchise itself, with all the movies, shows, and whatnot that The Invisible Man has appeared in, many of them are pretty fantastic and well artsy enough to display the character in such unique glory. So, I guess that's it for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with another piece correlating two different franchises. So, I'll see you guys then.